Heroes keep us safe until they demand a sacrifice. In the previous episode, Jung witnessed the head of the slain man floating down a river. Now he is asked to do the unthinkable and turn the blade on himself.
You thought you knew that abyss.
The capacity for good and evil exists within every single one of us, and in our Western culture, which has its roots in Christianity, you're taught to retreat from those negative thoughts or even repress them instead of questioning them or facing them head on. The avoidance of these negative thoughts or emotions allows them to fester, which can lead to a myriad of issues later on in life, especially for those who have a tendency to project their shadow onto others, rather than conquering their inner demons. In many of the recent political killings, the victim is chosen less for who they are, more than for what they can be made to represent. They're a canvas that a killer can paint evil onto. And the real evil emerges when we stop seeing people as individuals and instead begin judging them as symbols. Jung would go on to call these real-world assassins blind prophets. Now, there are modern therapies used to combat negative thoughts, such as cognitive behavioral therapy, better known as CBT, where instead of fleeing from those cruel and/or depressive thoughts, you write them down, you interrogate them, and you challenge them with logic, essentially using Jung's spirit of this time for a more positive use case. It is definitely not a fix-all for everyone and every problem, and again, we're all individuals with varying psychological needs, but I can't deny that the methods outlined in CBT have been useful in my own life. I picked up Olivia Telford's book, finished it within a day, and was left with a handful of useful ideas that have been amazing for me ever since. But tangent aside, let's get back to Jung, where he was reflecting on the image of the slain blonde hero and would immediately go on to give a psychological and collective interpretation of it.
I would like you to see what the murdered hero means. Through the murder of princes, we will learn that the prince in us, the hero, is threatened.
There's an internalization of conflict as Jung recognizes that these visions are echoed from within his own psyche. He would state that within the duality of this experience, he is both the murderer and murdered, sacrificer and sacrificed. This hero persona, which had been brought to the surface of Carl's consciousness, was an embodiment of the spirit of this time, that rigid, left-brained logical force that's only concerned with facts, figures, and efficiency. It's presented as this self-optimizing force, one that strides forward on an everlasting ascent towards perfection.
The heroic in you is the fact that you are ruled by the thoughts that this or that is good, that this or that performance is indispensable, this or that cause is objectionable, this or that goal must be attained in headlong striving work, this or that pleasure should be ruthlessly repressed at all costs.
In other words, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Balance, it matters. If you narrow your focus too much, it becomes a tunnel and burnout follows. And so do the missed insights that come directly from stepping away and giving yourself space. My favorite part of making this series so far is the cycle itself. It's the reading, rewriting, and then returning to life. With that space, I don't chase connections. They're presenting themselves at the right moment. I get to practice what the material teaches, and it goes in stark contrast to my day job where there's no time for pause or reflection. I mean, I have an example. The night after I was writing this section, I had a dream that rhymed with Jung's vision of the fallen hero. In my dream, I unfortunately was receiving news of my father's passing while working on a corporate spreadsheet. I cried, I mourned his death before the dream would go on to evolve into a decaying desert city. Now, in reality, my dad is alive and well, and I hope it stays that way for a long time, but the duality of meaning was interesting to me. You can view the father figure as the heroic organizing principle, or better yet, the spirit of this time, especially when the setting is an office and the medium is a spreadsheet. I mean, come on, dreaming mind, that's a little too on the nose. To really hammer it home, Jung writes,
consequently, you sin against incapacity. But incapacity exists. No one should deny it, find fault with it, or shout it down.
Carl had followed his soul into sand. Becoming the desert was his first metamorphosis. The next would be harsher.
To journey to hell means to become hell oneself.
He speaks of horrible, entangled, invisible beings who live in the desert. These creatures, which he describes as magical beings, murderously attach themselves and demonically change his form. Carl would become a beast, stripped of his humanity, ensnared by hellish magic and invisible nooses. It reminds me of the quote by Nietzsche,
"He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you."
Jung's process here was the unavoidable acceptance of chaos, embracing the totality of his inner experience, including the worst aspects.
Climb down into your depths. Sink.
In a near panic, Jung replies,
"How can I sink? I am unable to do this myself."
And once again, the spirit of the depths replied,
"Sit yourself down. Be calm."
This insult of stillness felt like a sort of spiritual trolling, and reflected that earlier notion that the path to truth is only revealed to those without intention. Carl was still holding on to that steering wheel. In order to sink deeper, he would have to let go. And in his unwillingness to do so, he felt his frustration bubbling to the surface, giving way to violent intentions.
"Is this your way, my soul? The blood boils in me, and I would strangle you if I could seize you. You weave the thickest darkness. I am like a madman caught in your net, but I yearn. Teach me."
He asks his soul for direction, and it answers that the path is light. And this claim jars Jung. He's in disbelief, as it's a complete contradiction to his own experience, and almost mockingly, he asks whether the soul calls day-night. But Jung is quickly put back in his place as the soul says,
"My light is not of this world."
Now it's easy to read that as some sort of mystical flex, but the whole chapter, The Splitting of the Spirit, leans on this idea that the subject of the soul is spoken in images, not words, feelings, not facts, almost like a melody with the power to invoke meaning without ever uttering a single word. There were definitely moments while making this episode where I myself became worried of brute forcing the narrative with a mode of thinking driven by my own spirit of this time. But then I had my own dream in the desert. I was barefoot on a bike, coasting through a city of sand and wind. Arriving at a steep alley, I had a sense of fear which washed over me. My heart began to race, my breath was shallow, and then a second cyclist slipped in next to me. Something about him was wrong. He emanated a dangerous energy, but cautiously, I began my descent, and slowly, I fell deeper into fear. Reaching the bottom, I swung around the corner and I was met by something bizarre. A staircase made of pillows, tens of thousands of them rising as far as the eye can see. The man who had escorted me to the depths began neatening out the steps, smoothing and squaring each cushion. And I'm wondering whether he's the caretaker of this impossible ascent. And I ask, do you think it's possible to take this path? He turns around, revealing a demonic face and says, I'd find another way. When I woke up, the reading was simple and sharp. Stepping towards discomfort revealed a path made of rest and dreams, stacked as a trial, not a refuge. And maybe, just maybe, I was a little too quick to back down from this challenge, letting the demon's caution turn me from the climb I needed to make. It was a reminder that in order to do this series justice, I would have to imbue it with a sense of abstraction and visualization, that I'd also have to take inspiration from more than the written words of the book. The divine spark that Carl was looking for would not kneel to his dominant demands, it would only meet him on its own terms.
Who gives you thoughts and words? Do you make them? Don't you know yet that it comes from me and belongs to me?
He was locked in battle with his soul, and he perceived its responses as mocking riddles.
But then my indignation must also come from you, and in me you are indignant against yourself?
What the soul said next would send Carl into a fury.
That is civil war.
Carl was afflicted with pain and rage. He would crawl through mud, eat the dust of the desert, but he would not yield to the soul. He felt defiant, and he would slay the torments of his soul.
Come close, I am ready, ready my soul. You who are a devil, to wrestle with you too. You donned the mask of a god and I worshipped you. Now you wear the mask of a devil, a frightful one, the mask of the banal, of eternal mediocrity.
The lust for battle burned in Jung's limbs. He had enough of this nonsense and was ready to crush this godly yet demonic mask which he perceived before him. But before he could attempt the assault, the sand began to shift and he slipped into another vision. Invisible robbers and assassins now stalk Jung in the desert. He looks down to his chest to see a poison arrow sticking in his heart. This triggers a transformation, turning him into a rapacious beast filled with rage and murderous intent towards the highest and most beloved, the image of the hero.
Because I carried the murder in me, I foresaw it. Because I carried the war in me, I foresaw it.
This image of the hero was Jung's ego, and the assassin a psychic function that activates when the previously calcified ideal begins to break apart. He'd previously dismissed this soul as hollow, tasteless, and meaningless. All of these thoughts borrowed from the spirit of this time. With this vision, the blinders loosened and he began to see past his own language, that he was more than just his words. He reflected on this vision, the poison arrow in his chest.
This murder is the indignation of incapacity against will, a Judas betrayal that one would like someone else to have committed. We are still seeking the goat that should bear our sin.
At the start of this episode, we touched upon the idea of projection, how it's often easier to use others as a canvas for our pain. The sacrifice of the goat is to place the blame on something outside of ourselves instead of taking responsibility. Now, is it really fair to make others suffer because of our own unwillingness to accept incapacity? In the closing of the splitting of the spirits, Jung writes,
"Everything that becomes too old becomes evil."
Even the best God image, if it remains unexamined and static, it will eventually become petrified and cruel. We can respect tradition, but it can also fall out of date, becoming a hindrance in an ever-evolving world. When an image of success, of virtue, of nation, of self stops giving life, it must fall secretly, or it will be overthrown violently. I read this as a principle for careers, relationships, even creative pursuits. If we cling to yesterday's form, tomorrow will take it from us with interest. Now, you might be skeptical of Jung's process of becoming hell, maybe even see it as a demonic practice, but it's ethical because it leads to Jung's refusal of scapegoating others. To own the assassin inside is to diffuse him outside. All across this chapter, we're reminded of humility. Incapacity exists and no one should deny it. That's such a weirdly merciful sentence in a chapter full of rage. He's saying that you're not omnipotent and your limitations are not moral crimes. When you deny incapacity, you perform competence until you're made brittle. A society that permits people to admit, I don't know and I can't, without humiliation, is a society that's less likely to erupt. Carl Jung's visions would go on to persist, and in his next, he would attempt to slay a son of Odin. Jung finds himself in a pre-dawn mountain pass accompanied by a youth. They're both armed to kill. The jubilant horn of Siegfried echoes from over the cliff as Jung prepares an ambush beside a narrow path. Then the hero arrives on a chariot made of bones of the dead. But the moment is cut short as Jung fires with his companion and the hero falls. It's almost anticlimactic the way the hero is taken out with one shot, and it causes this terrible rain and inner torment which challenges Carl to solve it or take his own life. Out of this devastation, the spirit of the depths emerges and speaks.
The highest truth is one and the same with the absurd.
After the downpour, Carl is flung into another vision. Silk-clad forms in a radiant garden, glowing red, blue and green, and it signals a turn.
I know I have stridden across the depths. Through guilt I have become a newborn. We also live in our dreams. We do not live only by day. Sometimes we accomplish our greatest deeds in dreams.
It's a repeating theme. With each vision, the hammer is falling, chipping away at his ideals, making room for change. Importantly, he doesn't duel the hero fairly, he assassinates him, and this offends our ethics on purpose. Jung's point here is if the God image you live by has seized sovereignty, you cannot out-argue it, you have to unseat it by an act that feels like sacrilege.
You can reach your God only as an assassin if you want to overcome him.
Because the inner deity you're fused with wears your virtues as armor, this metaphorical murder is simply the refusal to let yesterday's good rule today. The chapter itself warns mistaking this for destruction in the outside world.
If men kill their princes, they do so because they cannot kill their gods, and because they do not know that they should kill their gods in themselves.
It's a call to retire what's become dead within, and that distinction really matters in a culture addicted to hot takes. He says that if a god grows too old, he becomes a shadow, even nonsense, which is to say, if your values that you live by no longer give you life, maybe it's no longer relevant and it's time to drop it. For modern ears, the move away from a triumphant hero myth reads like a refusal of cultural inflation, the fantasy of being destined, pure, straight line ascending. The chariot made of bones of the dead is a savage image of progress that rides on unacknowledged costs. If our sense of self drives boldly and magnificently over steep rocks on bone wheels, the psyche eventually rebels.
Gods are unavoidable. The more you flee from the god, the more surely you fall into his hand.
A flood of tears releases Carl's tension as he finds the answer to his riddle, freeing him from the grasp of death. In order for him to survive, he would have to claim a new god, and that god would come from within. Jung turns from a bone chariot and rain to something quieter but far stranger, a god born from dark ambiguity and rising to bright ambiguity. Here, the spirit of the depths announces a child.
I have received your sprout, you who are to come.
Reading this chapter, the conception of a god was a lot. Initially, you're sitting there thinking, great, first Carl went to hell, then he became hell, and now he's pregnant with God. And I'll be honest, that's where I took a break from writing for the evening. But after taking some time away, I feel as if I better understand what's really going on. I recalled the youth who had helped Jung assassinate Siegfried. Initially, I didn't give him much attention. Then I was reminded of the old Bible verse about those wishing to enter the kingdom of heaven needing to be childlike in their temperament. I always read that as a metaphor, meaning being open-minded and curious. With that modality of thought, you'd more likely end up in a positive state of being, while the reverse of that would lead to a place of rigidity, without awe, without wonder, which can lead you to a lack of meaning and ultimately a metaphorical hell. Not in some ethereal realm, but like right here in reality. And I think that's a very interesting parallel with the psychedelic experience. They'll often force a closed mind to be open to see reality from a different perspective, essentially reigniting that childlike curiosity about the world. I've also heard many accounts of people who experience a tribal, ritualistic, or even technological death before going through a process of rebirth, and sometimes with a child being a part of those visions too. What's interesting to me is that Carl reaffirms that because these visions happen in our own minds, that they are representations of us. In Jung's case, this Godhead would be his childlike curiosity of the world, which is completely juxtaposed to his previous Godhead, the unrelenting hero.
I understood that the new God would be in the relative.
There is something to be said about simply existing in the moment, appreciating the world as an observer without intention. I had a very profound experience learning this while reading the Red Book almost half a decade ago. I was training in my bedroom, lifting weights, letting my mind wander, when I heard a voice in my head that said,
"Go to the window."
And I ignored it. I thought, that's stupid. I'm trying to get healthy. No excuses, no rest. I'm overcoming this depressive state that I'm in. Why would I go to the window? That's dumb. But the voice persisted, and I felt myself becoming annoyed until I realized the voice felt as if it was coming outside of myself, which was new. I never had that feeling before. So kind of reluctantly and with a sense of I'm an idiot for giving any attention to this instruction whatsoever, I walked over to the window and I thought, what now? And I can't tell you just how silly I felt paying attention to this thought, but the voice spoke and it said,
"What do you see?"
So I looked around and I listed a couple of things. That is a house, that is a road, that is a tree. It's dumb, right? Really dumb. But the voice spoke again.
"What do you see?"
And reluctantly, I continued to look around. There's a chimney, there's tarmac, there's a leaf. And what began to happen is I went from seeing nothing to seeing all of the insular details of the outside world. Each individual brick with a different tonal gradient, some more worn than others, the differing textures across the flora and how they had sprung up from the road in between the cracks in the pavement. And I initially thought, I don't understand this game. This is too weird for me. I'm done playing. I'm gonna go back and train. But then the voice came back louder. And again, I ignored it until the voice was spoken like a command. Angrily, I walked back to the window, and when I arrived, a shadow passed over the houses, the garden, the road, and it went from being the sunniest summer's day to a storm. And the voice said,
"What do you see?"
And I witnessed the steam evaporating off the roof tiles, the water running down the gutters onto the road, textures changing as they became wet. And then the voice spoke up again and said,
"What do you hear?"
And I could hear each individual raindrop as it hit wood, stone, metal. It was like a symphony of sound, and in the highest definition I've ever contemplated. During that 30 seconds of rain, I was forced into existing as my environment. It was like the voice had kicked open my closed mind, and as that message was starting to hit, the rain suddenly stopped. The shadow vanished, the sun beamed, and the voice said,
"Now you see."
And I stumbled away from the window in awe. It freaked me out, it really did, because it's such a weird sequence of events, which Jung might have called a synchronicity. I had to have a moment of feeling crazy in order to gain a level of clarity that went beyond my default modality of thinking. And that is a running theme throughout the Red Book. Jung would continue to dig into these themes, reflecting on Jesus' death.
After his death, Christ had to journey to hell. Otherwise, the ascent to heaven would have become impossible for him. Christ first had to become his Antichrist, his underworldly brother.
He insists the harrowing of hell is not an ornament to the myth, but a structural necessity. Without the descent, the ascent would be impossible. And this theme ties into Jung's broader insistence that wholeness outranks perfection. Perfection freezes, while wholeness suffers opposites and eventually integrates them. He even dares to call Jesus' 3 days below folly, monkey business, an atrocious hell's masquerade of the holiest mysteries. That's not mockery per se, more than a sort of warning that redeeming the opposite in yourself will look foolish to your heroic persona. A form of suffering is required in the pursuit of meaning, and without a challenge, you will unfortunately abort the process.
Notice that Christ did not remain in hell, but rose to the heights in the beyond.
Jung would go on to outline what a waking hell looks like, a state of mind where one thinks and feels things that they don't want to, but they do so consciously and are therefore responsible for it.
Hell is when you know that everything serious that you have planned with yourself is also laughable, that everything fine is also brutal, that everything good is also bad, everything high is also low, and that everything pleasant is also shameful.
I think there's truth in that statement, especially in lifestyle creep. I mean, how many people that we know who were recently promoted but are still complaining about money? They've just been on holiday, they've leased a car, but they've got no cash in the bank. We humans are really good at creating these self-imposed prisons. In the closing parts of this chapter, the conception of the God, Jung realigns the highest ideal that he has. He wants to move this image of God that exists outside of himself up until this point, inside of himself. It's that notion of worshipping false idols. I mean, I've been guilty of it. I remember getting into music production as a teenager, and I was like, I want to be deadmau5. And then I got into filmmaking and I was like, I'm gonna be the next Edgar Wright. Even now, there are creators that I look up to and emulate as part of this series. The golden ideal of who I could be shifts around with the many talented and influential people I think I'd like to be like. And the issue with that is that you can end up chasing potential for the sake of chasing potential. Jung advocates for turning that gaze inwards to discover what you truly want instead of being blinded by others' achievements. So what does it all mean? Having slain the hero, Jung goes after his second crutch, discipleship by imitation.
Imitation was a way of life when men still needed the heroic prototype. But the time will come when a piece of that apishness will fall away from men.
This new inner god laughs at imitation. He needs no imitators and no pupils. Imitation props up collective identity, but it stalls individuation. And the psyche, it wants original relation to the center. In other words, novelty keeps existence interesting. I think there's an aspect of ego dissolution with that. If there are no pupils or observers other than yourself, then it's hard to be full of ego. It's a challenge that I have to deal with this series. I mean, I put a lot of time into the content, I work hard, and when I post it, I want it to do well. I'll find myself looking at the metrics, anticipating a response, and I can't help but feel like that kind of goes against the point of Jung's message in the book. It does feel like I'm attempting to walk the path of the hero, which goes in contrast to what Jung is putting forward in the chapters we've covered. And I'll end on this bizarre synchronicity. If you remember earlier, I recalled a dream about my father's death, and jokingly I prodded fun at how on the nose it was, how it potentially stood for a metaphorical weakening of the spirit of this time. Well, 2 days after writing that, I get a call from my dad out of the blue, and he's just wanted to get in touch to tell me that he's taken out a funeral plan and that he has a spreadsheet with people he wants to come to the wake. And I mean, like, what does that mean? That's not a normal conversation to have. And that's what when I say this stuff can feel supernatural sometimes, is exactly those kind of reasons. Yeah, maybe it's a coincidence, the left brain takers, it probably is, but what if it isn't? Hey, I just want to say a quick thank you if you've taken the time to watch the series so far. Liking, subscribing, and even leaving a comment does a lot to boost its relevance in the algorithm, and it pushes it to the right audience too. If you've not seen the first episode, you can find it here. It's an exploration of Jung's visions, the first ones that he has, including the premonitions of the First World War and his descent into hell. In the next episode, which will be up here, I believe, once I get it done, Jung will go on to meet Salome and Elijah. And thanks again for watching.